the 20th century, every great adventurer had one goal, and this was to reach the South Pole. One man, his name was Ernest Shackleton, and this is what he wanted. And he failed a couple times, but this didn't stop him. He would go on to perform one of the most heroic expeditions of all time. You know, they faced many hardships, including starvation, cold, darkness, everything. It was terrible, but in the end, what came out was just great. So in order to understand this, we're going to have to go back to his first attempt. A British naval officer requested that he goes with them to their adventure to the South Pole. They didn't make it because of illness. They all had to turn back, but they made it the farthest anyone had ever made it before. And a little bit later, Shackleton tried it again with his own crew and his own ship called the Nimrod. They made it less than 100 miles off the coast of Antarctica before having to turn around due to lack of supplies. Now, at this time, a Norwegian man reaches the South Pole first, and with that goes all the awards and glory of, exploring this frozen wasteland. And this discouraged Shackleton a little bit, but he decided that he would do something even greater. 6 years later, he decided he was going to cross the entire continent on foot. Now, he gathered up all the funding and men he needed for this expedition, and most of the money went to this ship. It was called the Polaris. It was 144 feet long, made of pine and fir. It was covered in this green heart, which is a wood that could take whatever beating was put onto it. But it was called the Polaris, and he renamed Endurance after his family's motto, which is, "By endurance we conquer." So then, in 1914, after he's gotten all his men, his ship is ready, everything they have is good, he sets south from England to Buenos Aires. This is August of 1914. He goes to Buenos Aires. He's there for a couple weeks where they get all their supplies. These supplies include, just food, clothing, things they need. Some interesting things they got there was 69 Canadian sled dogs and 1 Australian photographer. What's interesting about the photographer is that throughout the exploration of the world, photography didn't exist. And now that people are getting to this freshly, explored continent, Antarctica, photography was now a portion. So people around the world could see what these explorers were teaching. And this book, where most of my information comes from today, is Published Images from the Photographer. And it does a great job of showing what they went through with this expedition, and it's a really good book. But anyways, after they leave Buenos Aires, they go to this place called Elephant Island, which is about 800 miles away from Antarctica. And while they're there, they stay with some Norwegian whalers, which was pretty much all that was at this tiny little island. And they stay there for about a month because conditions weren't all that great. But after a while, they did head south to Antarctica, and they have to weave around and smash through these huge icebergs and ice packs, and Shackleton described it as a jigsaw puzzle that's created by nature, and you just kind of have to figure out how to work your way through this. But after a while, they had an issue. They became stuck in the ice. The conditions were much harsher than they initially expected, and they became stuck there for a long time. They tried to make contact to some of the stations around, but they didn't have any luck with that, and now they started to drift away from their original path. So now no one knows where they are, and they're stuck. They're stuck for so long that they start to make names for some of the icebergs, and they build structures out of the snow and ice, like dog hospitals, and they play soccer in the snow, and they began to dig into their supplies that were saved later for the expedition. And now the month of May rolls around. Keep in mind, they left August. It is now May, and they are still stuck in the ice. And what this means is, due to Antarctica's location on the globe, they're not going to be seeing sun for several months. So here they are in the cold, dark, stuck on the ice until October. So the entire summer, they're in this essentially terrifying place. No one wants to be here. And October, it warms up enough that the ice breaks up, and they're able to, make a little bit of progress. But then the pressure from the ice causes their ship to, it bursts open the hull, and they have trouble controlling the water levels. And Shackleton gives the key. All right, we have to abandon ship. So now they're not on their ship anymore. They're made a camp on this iceberg, and they decided they're going to hike to the nearest island, which is Robertson Island, roughly 200 miles away. So they know in order to do this, they're going to have to cut some weight, so they get rid of all unnecessary junk. And unfortunately, some of the things that included was the cat they had on ship, along with all the puppies that were born on board during this. So they were a little bit upset about this, but anyways, they decided they were going to march. But on first attempt, it took them 8 hours to march 1.25 miles. And everyone was upset about this, and they'd been out in the cold for a long time. They were having issues, they were running out of supplies, and they came under the consensus that the food the dogs were getting were far too valuable. So one man was put in charge of shooting 27 of the sled dogs, and he said there's many men he'd rather shoot than the worst of those dogs, and they were all upset with this, and the dogs then became part of their diet to come. So that was unfortunate for them, but they kept marching, they kept working, and then eventually all the dogs were killed and eaten, and they also ate things such as the occasional seal and penguins that they found. One time they ran into a flock of penguins and they ate 300 of them. So sometimes they were eating decent meals. But come like December 23rd rolls around. So we left in August, it's been May, now we're December. So over a year they've left and they've been stuck on this chunk of ice for a long time, and they're drifting. And Shackleton experiences his first kind of sign of rebellion, which isn't good for any leader of an expedition. He's a little bit terrified by this. But he gives them like a couple days of rest, and everything calms down. But they're still running out of supplies, freezing cold, lacking everything they need. But then eventually they do reach Robertson Island they brought their life rafts with them, and then when the ice would break open, they take the waterways they could, hiking, drifting. This all got them to Robertson Island 15 months later. So after 15 months of being stuck on this ice, they all reached the island, most of them mentally unstable, starving, cold, everything. And they reach this island which has a little bit more resources, so they're able to kind of sustain themselves a little bit better, still not great by any means, and they make shelters out of some of their supplies they had and rocks and stuff. But then, at this point, Shackleton decides they need to make a decision. They need to be rescued at this point. So he and 5 other men sail the 800 miles back to Elephant Island using the life rafts. Now, what's impressive about this is that these ships weren't very big, and the navigation systems they use the stars, and due to cloud cover and the shakiness of the boat, they were never able to get an accurate measurement. So it's a miracle that they even made it to Elephant Island 17 days later. When they got there, they knew they had no time to waste at all. So they hiked 36 hours continuously through 22 miles of rigorous terrain to get back to the station where they had met the whalers all those months prior. Now they were all happy at this point because they had a chance. So now came the rescue of the 20 or so remaining men at Robertson Island. This took several months in a ship borrowed to them by the Chilean government. And then all throughout the process of the rescue, they really had no idea if the rest of their crew was even still alive. But they all survived. Every single one of the men survived, and they were all so happy that they all lived, and they were given awards for this heroic little adventure they had. So even though they didn't complete their original goal, and they faced many things such as extreme cold, darkness, starvation, they proved they could do much more than they wanted to, and that's what really made the Endurance one of the greatest expeditions of all time.